the opportunity. So my name's Jason McWhirter. I'm a district officer within the Lake George district, which covers essentially most of the Queanbeyan and Palorang Regional Council area. My background has been as a volunteer firefighter as well as paid staff. So I joined what was then the Bushfire Brigades back in 1988 and have seen and been to a lot of bushfires right across my time. I started working with the Rural Fire Service in 2014 and as a GIS operator, supporting a lot of the districts in Region West, so that's sort of Dubbo area and around. And then got a transfer here to Queanbeyan, so I've been based here since 2017. So thank you very much for having me. So I've got a bit of a presentation and I'll go through. If you have any questions, just feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them straight away. So can you see that there, Alex? Am I sharing the screen properly just to start with?
That hasn't come up yet. So
hasn't come up. Hang on.
Just try that again. There we go. That's looking better.
Great.
Yep, that's great.
Yep. So things that I'll be covering tonight, bushfire planning, sort of on a scale that we look at from the Rural Fire Service, but then how these bushfire risk management plans can help you as a landowner. And then vegetation management, which goes with that, and bushfire zones. So you'll hear a lot of people talk about different bushfire zones. So we really look at, I suppose, you'll hear like asset protection zones and things like that. So we cover that type of thing. I'm sorry, I just can't see the chat at the moment, just in case anyone's.
I've got it up. Sorry, Jason.
Yep,
yeah, I've got it up so I can actually see. There's just a few people having a few audio issues, so I'm going to try and contact them directly and see if I can help them sort it out.
No worries. I'll be covering a little bit on permits and hazard reduction certificates and the differences between those, because as a landowner, a lot of the questions that we get is, how can I use fire to manage the hazards on my property? So I'll cover that a little bit, and then I'll go into a lot more information about bushfire survival plans and sort of tricks and tips on how to do that, and equipment that as a farmer that you would possibly need to have on hand, so you can actually protect your property best you can. So we have a bushfire risk management plan. So this is managed by the Bushfire Management Committee. Bushfire Management Committees are made up of members from Roads and Maritime Services, Lands Department, Fire and Rescue, Police, Railway, Council, National Parks, State Forests, National Farmers Federation, local Aboriginal land councils, and they mainly look at things around the districts where they're looking after. So a Bushfire Management Committee area may cover one or more local government areas. So depending on where you are in the state, depends on what your Bushfire Management Committee is. You can see a link there that's on the screen. That's where you can have a look at your local bushfire risk management plan. Just be aware that some of the names are different to what you would expect them to be. For example, Queanbeyan and Palorang Regional council area is actually the Lake George Bushfire Management Committee. So the names may not marry up. So you just have to be patient and just look for it. If you're unsure and you really want to find out, contact your local fire control centre and they'll be able to tell you what the actual name of the Bushfire Management Committee is, and then you can get hold of that Bushfire Risk Management Plan. So the plan is aimed to minimise the risk of adverse impacts of bushfires on life, property and the environment. And it mainly looks at reducing the number of human-induced bushfire ignitions that cause damage, to manage fuel, especially to help with the rate of spread and intensity of bushfires, and also looks at environmental and ecological impacts that you may have from bushfires, as well as stuff that we need to do to mitigate those risks. So the to look at a bushfire risk management plan, we have considerations. So we look at the local climate and the current bushfire season. So predominantly bushfire seasons start on 1st of October and go through to 31st of March every year. Sometimes they come forward and can be extended or started later, depending on the local climate at the time. It looks at all the ignition history across the area of the risk plan and the bushfire history, both wildfires as well as hazard reductions. We have assets that we look at, which are human settlement, economic assets, which are like state forests for wood stuff. We've got environmental assets, so national parks, nature reserves and things like that. And we look at both Indigenous and European cultural heritage. So we make sure that we look at those kind of things because they are definitely assets. So, for example, with the Indigenous culture, there's certain things that we can and can't do to look at reducing the impact so we don't damage those assets. So the bushfire management plan looks at bushfire management zones. So we have asset protection zones, and we have strategic fire advantage zones, fire exclusion zones where we would like to keep fire out. And a lot of that is based on environmental impacts. And then we have land management zones. The plan looks at treating the risks to minimise the hazards. So we look at risk acceptability, and assign treatments to mitigate those risks. So they could be hazard reduction, community engagement and education, which is what I'm doing tonight, property planning, ignition prevention, so trying to reduce ignition points, and preparedness, which hopefully after tonight you guys will have a little bit more information about how to prepare your own property. So asset protection zones, their purpose is to protect human life, property and highly valued public assets. So we look at things like special fire protection buildings such as schools, nursing homes and things like that they may need a larger asset protection zone because they are housing a lot more people compared to just a single dwelling that's housing one family. So the main objectives of having a really good asset protection zone is to enable the safe use of direct attack suppression within that area by firefighters and to minimise the bushfire impacts on undefended assets. So you can actually, if you've got a really good setup, you could actually leave your property and hopefully the asset protection zone does its job, and when you get back, your house is still standing. So I've just got some photos here that sort of demonstrate what an asset protection zone is. So this is northern area of Canberra. In a lot of the new development applications for new suburbs, they actually have to put in place asset protection zones. So thinking of where the edge of those houses are and where the bush starts, you've got a good road, which is at least a minimum of sort of 6 to 8 metres wide. Then you actually have a bit of a grass paddock, which is mowed by the council before you actually get into the bush. So it really keeps the radiant heat back from those houses. So that's a really good one. This next photo shows a fairly poor asset protection zone. So when you're looking at a property like this, you can just see through the vegetation that there's a clear fire path that could happen between where the main part of the scrub is and right up to the building, because there's almost continuous canopy touching. So this can actually be an issue when you're wanting to leave and wanting to stay, because there's no real safe area for firefighters to work on this property without having to come up against sort of radiant heat. So you've got to really be careful of how you set up. This one is got a really good asset protection zone area. So you can see where they've put their driveway to the north of the house, nice and clear, easy working area for firefighters if they need to come in. There's no canopy touching right up against the house. There's lots of breaks between the canopy in a lot of the grassed areas. So there's actually really good areas there to work around and to protect your place. So the components of an asset protection zone are based on the 1050 rule, which is a instrument that is used to help create these zones. So you can look at, in a rural setting, 10 metres from the eaves of the house, you can clear pretty much all vegetation, including trees, and then from the 10 metre mark out to the 50 metre mark, we do what's called underscrubbing. So you're looking at taking out small shrubs, keeping the grasses down as much as possible, as well as trimming the trees to about 2 metres up, so that if a fire does come through, it stays on the ground and doesn't get into the canopy. And then you have your actual bushland that's further afield. And as I said, with the urban one, you can see that a lot of the newer estates are coming up with putting a road at the edge. So that's the actual nice clear breakage in the fuel loads. This photo here is of a really good asset protection zone that kept this property safe. So what they did is, as you can see, you've got a lot of cleared vegetation around. They also watered their lawn up prior to the fire coming through. So they kept their lawn nice and watered, which helps protect it. One good thing about this photo is if you have a look at the right-hand side of the photo, you can actually see trees that have still got leaves on it. Those trees were actually protected by the asset protection zone in the house. So the fires come through from the left-hand side around the property, but those trees were actually protected by the house and that asset protection zone. So a lot of people don't realise, they sort of get focused on especially with this photo, looking at the devastation of the fire, but asset protection zones can help that. And if that property's got a good asset protection zone and their neighbours don't, that property can actually help save their neighbour as well. But it's best to have your own zone set up really nicely. But you can see there the clear area around the front of the house and around the shed, which worked really well for this particular property. 90% of houses are burned down from ember attack. It's one of the stats that we really find hard, is that, like, a lot of people think, oh, houses burn down because they're being touched by flame, but it's not. 90% of houses burn from embers. Embers are very tiny. They can be almost the size of a grain of sand, all the way up to big chunks of bark, depending on the fire conditions at the time. I've got a really good story about the Tathra fires with this one, where I've had an experience. So the day the Tathra fires started in 2017, I had to go down from here straight away and made my way down there and did 3 night shifts. The main fire front had already passed through the township and quite a few numbers of houses burnt down. So the second couple of nights was just looking after the main fire. But what happened was we had a fire, a pot plant that was wooden, sitting on a balcony, and an ember had gotten into that and just sat there nuzzled away, just smouldering and smouldering away, to the fact where the the weight of the soil in that pot the structure was that damaged that it couldn't hold the weight. And once it split open, it actually allowed enough oxygen in for that ember to actually start with flames. And it actually caught the veranda on fire. We were just very lucky that we had a fire truck that was still patrolling the township and was able to put that out without the loss of that property. So an ember can sit there for days after the main fire front's gone through and still burn a property down. So embers are the really tricky bit that you need to ensure that you get hold of. So I've just got some photos on this slide to just show you the amount of embers that can actually be generated in a fire front. All three of these photos are actually taken during the day. The only one that was actually taken at night is the bottom right-hand one, with the tree. The other three, which show 2 firefighters in a car, they're all taken during the day. So that's how a fire can look. I'm sure that you guys are aware, but the amount of embers that are produced from a fire with a bit of windstorm, and it only takes one ember to burn a house down. So you can see how many embers can actually be generated in a firestorm. The next zone we have is a strategic fire advantage zone. So these are areas that we try to reduce the potential of an ignition point through hazard reductions. The main reason why we do this is to protect a bigger area. I've got some photos here. So this is an area near Queanbeyan. The blue hatching is the strategic fire advantage zones, which the reason that they're called strategic is that they actually looked at on a grander scale for community. So we can actually, through our legislation and our bushfire assessment code, we can actually manage those lands a bit more regularly than you would the other zones. Here's another one for around Borough. We have the strategic fire advantage zone in the middle, and even though that there are properties within that zone, it's mainly looking at protecting the two outer areas where there's a lot more properties. So we've got estates that are along those two roads onto the east and the west of that strategic fire advantage zones. So we try to reduce that the fuel loading in those areas, so we minimise the risk of a major fire coming through. The other good thing about these zones is once we do reduce, we keep the fuel load reduced, there's less chance of an ignition, and if a fire does start, they're actually easier to control due to lower rates of spread and lower intensity. We have fire exclusion zones. So this is where we really want to keep fire out of, and they vary depending on size and fire sensitive. So we have a couple around, and as I said earlier, they're mainly used for nature reserves and the like. So this one's got the strategic fire advantage zone on the right-hand side with a couple of properties, but the strategic fire advantage zone's not for those properties. It's more for the protection of that nature reserve. But also, if a fire does get in that nature reserve, it's because we don't do any fire in that area because of the sensitivity due to the vegetation types that are in there, that those properties on the far right are protected if a fire does come there and head towards the east. Then pretty much every other land is a land management zone if it's not one of those first three, and it's up to the land manager. Now, when we talk about land manager, that means if it's a private property, the owner of the property is the land manager. So it's up to their responsibility to look after and reduce the likelihood of spread of fire on their land. So from that, how do you manage the fire on your land if you want to use it? We do have bushfire hazard reduction certificates, and these aren't just for using fire. We can actually use this as a mechanical clearing as well. To reduce any sort of vegetation, native vegetation, you need to have an environmental approval. The hazard reduction certificate is the environmental approval. So instead of having to go and pay a consultant to do a REF or something like that, where it costs a lot of money, the RFS, if it's just for bushfire hazard reduction, the RFS has a free service of creating a hazard reduction certificate. So a qualified officer will come out, do a site inspection and determine that whether you can or can't go due to the environmental impacts. We also have a fire permit, which is contact your local RFS fire control centre to get a permit. Permits are only required if there's a danger to a building or for use of fire during the bushfire danger period, which is current at the moment. We have standards. So if you're very much interested in using asset protection zones or hazard reduction certificates or doing pile burning, we have standards on our website. That link there that you can see is a really good one. The Rural Fire Service website in general has a lot of information. You could sit there for days scrolling through it and still find a lot more information. But these standards are produced so that we can get the information out to everybody.
So, Jason, there is a question there from Ben, and it says, what if your place adjoins a national park? You got any comment about that?
Yep. So if your place adjoins a national park, I suppose, Ben, what are you getting at? Whether you're using fire on your land or you're wanting them to use fire on their land?
I'd have to turn Ben's mic on so he could answer. Jason, would you like me to do that?
Yes, please, just to clarify the question.
Okay, all right. Just bear with me for a sec. Is that okay, Ben, if I turn your mic on? Okay. Okay, so I've just allowed Ben to talk, I think.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
yeah, I just wanted to know, yeah, with regards, you mentioned there was actually no need for a permit in the off season, I think you said.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So I guess it was probably relating particularly to that question where, you know, I guess in my case, there might be a chance for a fire to get out of control and then end up in you know, a massive fire in the national park, I guess.
Yep. So under the legislation, every landowner is required to manage fire on their land. So in regards to that, in the so the non-bushfire danger period, you still need to notify all your immediate neighbours. So that includes anyone that abounds your property cadastrally, including those across a road, river, rail corridor, things like that, regardless of the land tenure. So if it's a national park, you'll have to contact the local national park office. If it is a state forest, you'll have to contact the forestry. If it's Crown land, you're supposed to you have to contact Crown land and all your immediate neighbours. Whether that the way you contact them to notify of your wanting to burn can be in writing, verbally, or anything like that. So it could be an email. It doesn't have to be. It's not specified in one particular way. In regards to national parks burning, if they are conducting a hazard reduction and that, they are meant to notify, under the legislation, is to notify every immediate landholder as well. So that means that they need to do that for you guys. And that notification has to be a minimum of 24 hours beforehand. So for instance, if I was going to burn on tomorrow morning and I wanted to, and I've got home and I'm going, oh yeah, looked at the weather tonight on the news, tomorrow looks like a good time to burn, I'm going to notify. Legally, I'm not allowed to burn until 24 hours from the time I notify. So that means tomorrow would be off. I'd have to do it Saturday, or I do it Friday night. Does that answer your question, Ben?
I've turned.
Oh, yeah.
Turned the mic.
Yeah, I think I am still on here, but yeah, thank you very much, Jason. That's great. Thank you.
Yep. No worries. So yeah, the standards are really good. Have a look at those. They've got a lot of good information in them for looking at asset protection zones, hazard reductions, and low intensity burn. Just with a hazard reduction certificate, so the differences between hazard reduction certificate and a permit is that the hazard reduction certificate is the environmental approval, and is required even if you're not going to use a permit. If you are going to use fire to reduce the hazard, you may need a permit. And the reason why it's may is because it's depending on the time of the year that you burn. If you're burning during the bushfire danger period, you'll need a permit for that. A hazard reduction certificate is issued by an accredited certificate issuing officer, which is predominantly Rural Fire Service staff. There is an application that is required and it lasts for 12 months. A permit is a safety approval to use fire, which is a big difference. A lot of people think, oh, yeah, I can just do it, but it's a safety approval, and there will be conditions on that are required. So you may require an environmental approval as well, depending on what you're burning. Permits are issued mainly by volunteers that are a permit issuing officer. So it's the volunteers that will come out, inspect what you're wanting to burn and write up a permit on that. There's no application for that, and it maximum lasts 21 days. Just with the hazard reduction certificate is that they need to be filled out. So I've got a example there of the application form. We do have a time for determination. It defaults to 7 days, but you do have a choice where you can circle down the bottom of 7, 14, so 1 week through to 4 weeks, depending on what you like, how quick you want it done. So we need to come out and inspect, take some fuel load samples and things like that, and then we'll also do a determination on a desktop on how far away the hazard is from the buildings and stuff like that. So just be aware that it does take some time to get done. So what is a fire permit?
Oh,
yes, sorry.
Can I just ask you another question there now?
Yep.
Which is, does the RFS provide any advice on Indigenous management practices that can enhance the ecological quality of the land?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure on that. We work in with a lot of Indigenous communities and a lot of Indigenous practices. A lot of our hazard reduction is based on science, which predominantly very much supports and works in hand with Indigenous fire management in keeping fire low and things like that, because the idea is to reduce the really fine fuel hazard. So like the leaves and the sticks and twigs that are there, that's the main stuff that we want to do. We don't want to go out there and sort of, I suppose what you can say is nuke the place. We don't like to do that. So we really work in with that. When we do a hazard reduction, we aim for the area, the total number of the area to be burnt is between 60 and 70%. And we just let fire take its own course through the landscape. So we might have an area of 100 hectares, and the aim is to burn 60 to 70 hectares within that, and the fire will make its own course because it will just trickle around with a flame height of about 0.5 metre high. And that's the idea, is that it just sort of trickles itself through the landscape.
So just in relation to the Indigenous or the Aboriginal sort of cultural burning, we have run a workshop on that, and there is some information on our website specifically about the cultural burning practice. So I can post that into the comments section.
Yep. So, Justine, to answer your question, yes, a hazard reduction certificate is only required if you are clearing native vegetation. If it's not native, then there's no need for an environmental approval. The environmental approval is required only for native vegetation. When is a permit required? As I said, during the bushfire danger period, or when it's proposed fire is dangerous to a building, or in the New South Wales Fire and Rescue District, which is all year round. So for those that are unsure what fire district you're in, essentially around Queanbeyan, it is a small area within Braidwood, and it's within sort of the 60k zone of Queanbeyan. Certain areas may not. So like Bungendore, even though it is a village, it doesn't have a fire and rescue district because it doesn't have a fire and rescue station. Neither does Googong. That both of those areas are rural fire districts. So depending on where you are, depends on whether you are in a fire rescue district. Most rural landholders will be in a rural fire district. When is a permit not required? So if you have a small camp or cooking fire, you're not required to have a permit even during the bushfire danger period, as long as it is well maintained and you have a supply of water handy, as you can see in the photo, and it's quite small. So you can use that all year round and when you're outside the burning bushfire danger period, but you still, as I said, need to notify. Bushfire survival plan. So a lot of the questions sort of relate to protecting your home and things like that. So hopefully a lot of the information I cover here will answer those questions. So bushfire survival plan can be downloaded from the Rural Fire Service website following that link. And they're quite simple. For information for bushfire emergencies, fires near me on the web or the mobile phone app is really the first port of call. With your mobile app, you can actually set a distance on your warning area from the place that you want, and I think you can have up to 5 places. So, for example, I have my house where I live, and I also have my in-laws who live down the coast, and have 2 separate distances because I live in town, so I have a 5k distance for me, but I have a 50k distance for my in-laws. So because they're out on a rural property. Matilda. Yes, you can burn a garden cuttings in a drum without a fire permit. You just need to notify your neighbours. Depending on the size of the drum, I'm thinking that you're talking about a 44-gallon drum, and that should be fine. As long as it's just garden clippings. No household waste is allowed because that's then considered an incinerator and goes against the Clean Airs Act. Bushfire emergencies, RFS website is a brilliant one. Facebook page and Twitter. And listen to your local ABC for warnings when there are bushfires around. The biggest thing with that is making sure that you are on the local one and not the national ABC. The national will cover in their news stories, but the local ones will give you more up to date as they have I suppose it's not a contract, but they have the authority to publish all the emergency warnings. Common mistakes people make with bushfire survival plans. They believe that they only need one plan. One of the biggest things, especially with rural landowners, like with my in-laws, they're elderly, but we go down or we send our children down who are teenagers down to their place for a week or 2. They should really have 2 plans, one for when they're there by themselves and one for when they've got their grandkids there. Because the fact that they're different dynamics within the family then. Looking at the different bushfire danger ratings, very high versus catastrophic. Fire behaviour between those 2 bushfire danger ratings is extremely different. So realistically, you should have a different plan for each. Your plan is going to be very individualized because of the fact of your physicality and your mental capability. A lot of people say, oh, I'm going to stay and defend no matter what. You got to make sure that you're both physically and mentally capable. A lot of people that are physically capable have cracked under the pressure because it is very scary when you have a fire front coming at you at 20 or 30 k's an hour. The roar is deafening. I'm sure that a lot of people have heard a lot of war stories, so to speak, about how fires comes ripping through a certain area. And quite a few of the people in the 2009 Black Saturday fires died because they left too late. They thought that they were physically capable and mentally capable to handle, to stay and defend. And then they just got too scared and panicked and took off. And with the roads being chocked with smoke and fallen trees and stuff like that, these poor people were caught out in the streets and perished in their cars. So make sure that you're physically and mentally capable to be able to handle that kind of stuff. And make sure that you have the appropriate equipment. So I'll go through what would be considered appropriate equipment. And other big mistakes that people make are having trigger points about when to leave early. And I'll go through some of that in a minute. So identify safe zones and escape routes with your plan. Safe zones are good for using clear, flat, open spaces with little to no fuel. So think like a football oval. So a lot of people have heard of neighbourhood safer places, or NSPs as they're called. Majority of them are football ovals because they're wide, flat, and no fuel. It's always mown to its inch of its life type thing because we play football or cricket on them. So there's no fuel there for it to really burn across. And the main reason is because they're away from radiant heat. You can be at one end of the oval and you're 200 metres away from the scrub. It doesn't matter which way it's coming from. So you're away from that radiant heat, which is the main killer for people and animals. Escape routes. It's best to have multiple escape routes because you're not sure which way a fire is going to come from. A lot of people, especially on this side of the country, believe that the fires come from the northwest all the time. With the major fire season in 2019, 2020, there were many times when the fires actually came from the east, and it really sort of took a lot of people by surprise. So make sure that you do have multiple escape routes. We're talking yesterday with Alex and I about there's a lot of places that are just sort of one-way dead end type places. That's where your plan really needs to then go. Are you going to stay and defend, or are you going to leave early? Because if you're going to stay and defend, you're staying till the end. So just be mindful of that. So trigger points. So these are really important, and again, these are things that are very much individually rated. So even though I'm talking about things these are things that you need to consider. So fire danger ratings. So if it's a catastrophic fire day, a fire could start and be rip-roaring through and burn your house down within 10 minutes from the time it starts. You might not even get notice that the fire has started on those kind of days because they are so catastrophic. So your trigger point might be you get notified that tomorrow is going to be a catastrophic fire day. Okay, so 9 o'clock, I'm going to pack the family up and we're going to go into town and go to the cinema and watch a movie. Bit hard while COVID's on, I understand, but that's the kind of thing that you would be looking at doing, so that you're not at home. You just make sure that the house is prepared as best you can tonight, and then you're out of there by morning. So if a fire starts anywhere, you're not home, so you're not going to perish. Or it could be on a very high fire danger day where a fire starts, but it's in a particular direction and within a certain distance from your property. So it might be from the northeast and it's 5 k's. Well, okay, when it hits the 2 k mark, I'm going to go. I've got time because it's not rip roaring through. Other trigger points that you need to look at is if you're at home alone, do you stay or do you go? Because it's going to be very physically demanding and mentally demanding to try to save a house on your own. If you're not at home, you need to make sure that you don't go back. During the Taliesin fire at Carwoola, we had multiple people that work in Canberra wanting to get back to their house. We're not going to let you in because it's dangerous. It's dangerous for our firefighters, let alone for members of the public that want to get back just to check on their family or on their house, because the roads are got trees across them, power lines across them, the smoke inhibits visibility. Fire trucks are using those roads to fight the fire, and so therefore we're going to have people on the ground on the road and in the dark smoke, as you could see in those photos earlier. Middle of the day, it's pitch black though, so you're actually going to possibly run over a firefighter if you try to drive in there. So we will close roads where we need to. So just keep that in mind, that if a fire starts and you're not at home, there's no chance of getting back. Equipment. So what kind of equipment do you need? So firefighters have personal protective equipment. So they have set overalls, boots, gloves, helmet, and things like that we use. What can you do at home? So a wide brim hat is really good because it will stop embers from dropping down onto your head and down the back of your shirt. Glasses and goggles. So against embers, as you could see in those photos, embers flying around everywhere. So you need glasses or goggles to protect your eyes. Gloves, really good sort of leather gloves. Riggers gloves are good. A P2 mask. I mean, a lot of people will know what a P2 mask is now, especially with COVID. P2 masks is really good because that's the best protection that you can have for your lungs. Yep, sock savers are good as long as they're cotton and they're not synthetic. So a long sleeve shirt, cotton and wool, because the fact that you don't want something that's going to be synthetic, because if it gets any sort of radiant heat, it will melt onto your skin and cause injury. Good pair of cotton pants or denim jeans are really good, and sturdy boots. That kind of stuff also involves for kids. So if you do have kids, you need that kind of equipment, that kind of clothing for your kids as well. And in an emergency, the best thing to do with kids when it comes to mentally preparing them is, with your fire plan, have a couple of particular jobs for them, because they found through the 2019 fires that those kids that actually had jobs and stuff, they were actually more resilient afterwards because they were focused on the job and not on the panic and the fear of what might happen. They were concentrating on doing their job and doing the job to the best of their ability. Now, that job may be look after the cat, make sure the cat doesn't run away. So the kid's just holding the cat, making sure the cat doesn't do anything. That gives the child that importance of having a job and helping out. Fuel powered pump. So a lot of people will say, oh yeah, I've got a pump and it's hooked to 240 volts because it's an electric pump. The first thing that goes is electricity in a fire, because the power poles are mainly wooden and they burn and they fall over. So you need to get a fuel powered pump, preferably diesel, because if it's really, really hot, you can get a vapor lock in a petrol pump. So it's preferably diesel, but they do cost more. So a lot of this information that I'm giving you will also depend on your budgetary capabilities if you do go down the path of doing stuff and getting stuff. It really does sort of really depends on an individual basis. Yeah, percolating canvas hoses, preferably with a Storts fitting. So you can see there the Storts fittings both on the pump and the hose. The reason why we prefer that is because that's the equipment that the Rural Fire Service use. They're the fittings that we use on our hoses. So if we turn up to your house and you've got a pump with one length of hose, but that length of hose is not long enough, we can lend you another length to tie to what you've already got there to get further. So we can easily hook straight into what you've already got. Preferred 38 mil is preferred for property protection because it delivers the amount of volume of water that's required to protect a house. 25 mil is just getting away with it. A garden hose is no good. You might as well just throw a water bottle around. You can get your canvas hoses from retail shops and that. You just put in a Google search. On being a government agency, we can't give information on who you can get them from, but there are suppliers around the Canberra, Queanbeyan region where you can just buy these equipment coupled with Storz fittings.
So would it be like rural suppliers and that kind of thing, do you think, Jason?
Yep. And hose suppliers. There's like Southern Hose and places like that that specialize in using hoses and stuff for irrigating and that kind of thing. A McLeod tool or Rayco, very useful for removing coarse and fine material around the area. So as you can see by the head, it's like a rake as well as a hoe. So we have those on our trucks and they're really good so you use the rake to get rid of the finer material and the coarser material, sorry, and then you use the other side to get rid of the finer material. Thanks, Steve. Yep, I'm getting to that, Ian. So livestock and large animals. DPI and local land services are the experts when it comes to livestock, but these are some questions that you need to ask yourself if you do have livestock or large animals such as horses. Are you able to sufficiently care for your stock for 3 to 7 days or longer? One of the biggest things I can relate personal experience is that my in-laws down the coast, they live just outside of Cobargo. So they had fire that came through. They had lost all their feed for their sheep. So luckily we were able to get in there, but a lot of people couldn't. So they couldn't actually get feed to there. So we took a trailer load of hay and made it in there to their place so we could actually get feed there because there was no feed left in the paddocks. Do you have a safe spot on your property? So out west, a lot of farmers they like to have a sacrifice paddock, I suppose is the best term for it, near the house, where they have it constantly grazed down to near next to nothing, so that if a fire does start, they can throw their stock in there. Others go, well, I'm just going to open the gate. So personal experience story again, down the coast, the fence got broken, which let the rams out. They were able to survive. If the rams didn't get out of the paddock, they would have perished. So we found them 2 doors down in a neighbour's property a day and a half after the fire had come through Cobargo. So, but had that fence not gone down, they probably would have perished in the paddock that they were in. The ewes were in a different paddock and they survived, so because they had a big dam there. But where the rams were, that they probably would have perished. So just making sure that you have them tagged as well. So that's the biggest one. Make sure that they've got an identifier. So if you do open the gates to let them out, so they can wander free around, that when you can get them back, you actually have a tag on them or identification to get them back. But the best people to talk to are DPI and LLS when it comes to that. And I believe, Alex, that you've got them on in a couple of weeks' time.
Yes, Jason, I'll share some details with that once you're finished.
Yep. The next biggest thing is access for emergency services. As you can see there, the trucks that we use, especially for property protection, are what we call our category 1 size tankers. So they're quite large. They 3.5 meters wide, 3.5 to 4 meters high. So as you can see in that photo, if you've got overhanging trees and branches, we're not going to get in there. And if we can't get our truck in there and turn around, it takes 17.5 meters to turn a truck around for the turning circle of those trucks. The chances of us going in there to protect your property are slim because it just endangers the crew and the truck. So, yep. Bryony, yeah, so don't let them out on the road. Yeah, when I meant by open the gate, within the property. So you're keeping them within the property, but they're not just locked into one particular paddock because they do become a hazard on the road. Good point. Yeah, so when it comes to access to your house, just make sure that a truck can get in there. So having good gates and clear driveway is really important. That's nearly it. The only other thing that I have is sort of the spring seasonal outlook. So AFAC, which is the national emergency sort of people that look after firefighting and emergency services, they put out a seasonal briefing for spring, summer, and that kind of thing. So this is a spring outlook at the moment. So we have a above normal fire potential in the northern part of the state. And the main reason there is that it's been driven by the wet grasses and the crop growth in these areas that are now starting to dry out with the warmer weather. And that goes the same in northern Western Australia. Lucky we can't get there though. I'd love to be over there at the moment. But for our area, we're below normal fire potential, and this is a result of the wet winter that we've had so far, and the looking forward that we're probably going to have a wet spring. But once we starts drying out, that wetness will actually create a lot more growth, and then once that growth has dried out, then our fire potential could increase through summer. But at the moment, for up till summer, so till the end of November, early December, we're below normal fire potential. So another slow fire season ahead. That's it. Any questions? Michael, are bathrooms and kitchens okay to retreat to? So that's a myth. That bathrooms are the safest place in a house in a bushfire. The best place to be in is the total opposite side of the house from the direction of the fire. The main reason for that is radiant heat. The rest of the house will protect you from the radiant heat from the actual fire front as it comes to the house. The other thing is that you want to be near is not directly near a window, but near a door so you can get out quickly. Because once the house catches a light, it can go up quite quickly. So if you're inside the house, you're protected from the radiant heat, the fire front goes through, the house will catch a light shortly after, but it's safe enough then to evacuate the house and go and find a nice burnt out area away from the house. But if you're in the middle in your bathroom, it may be too long for you to actually get out of the bathroom and out through one of the doors on the far side of the house. And if you're on that far side, the closest side to the fire will be the one where the fire starts in the house and works your way through. So you'll be on the safest side there. Native pastures less likely to catch than other pastures. Really depends on the curing rate of the pasture and the amount of fuel. Most pastures sort of get to a maximum of 6 tonnes per hectare, but it really depends on the curing. And what I mean by curing is how dry that pasture is. If it's less than 50%, you're not going to get fire that will carry through a pasture. They've done some really good experiments, CSIRO, around the Bungendore area with pastures and keeping certain pastures at different curing rates. So the drier it is, the faster it'll go through. And just remember that grass fires can kill. A lot of people think it's just bushfires, but you can actually have grass fires with quite high flame heights and quite high intensity, and fire runs a lot faster through grass than it does through bush. So just be aware of that. Where would you sit a fire pump? That really depends on the conditions of the house, where your water supply is, which way the fire's coming. Generally, you try to use the house as the break in the radiant heat, like what I was saying before. If you're in the house, so you would have the pump set up on the far side, but that depends also on where your tank is. Majority of properties nowadays, especially with their development applications, they require you to have a certain amount of tank space, anywhere from 10,000 litres to 100,000 litres, just for firefighting purposes. So it really depends on where your tank is and where you set your fire pump at. And again, making sure that it is a fuel-powered one and not an electric-powered one, because electricity is the first thing that normally goes out. So it's a really individual one. One thing I will say is, if you would like to have a site visit from the Rural Fire Service, our community engagement officers in our local brigades do a wonderful job where they can come out and provide a bit more individualised advice on your property. It's very hard to do that in a webinar like we are at the moment, in that everything is very individualised. So I'm just giving generalist sort of information at the moment. So depending on your place, depends on really where you're going to do it, but as close to the water supply as possible, but on the far side of where the fire is going to be as well. Shut all the interior doors. Yes, so the best thing to do is to shut all windows and all interior doors, put wet towels down at the base of doors and around window sills. They're the places where smoke will ingress the most, and be on the far side of the house. What are my thoughts on sprinkler systems and bunkers? Sprinkler systems are really good if you can afford them. There's quite a lot of different designs out there, but from my perspective, I believe that the best ones are sort of a soaker hose that are on the ridge caps that soak down into the gutters, which are recycled through a holding tank, with a slight 45-degree spray from the gutters down. So really sort of any embers that end up on the roof will get washed into the gutters and down into the tank. Any embers that are going towards the side of the house will get caught in that curtain of water from the slight fine spray that's going down. But again, it really depends on availability of funding, because these kind of setups are very expensive. Bunkers. I'm not really up on bunkers. They're sort of one things that Victorians seem to like a lot of. I don't really have any thoughts on bunkers, sorry. But I believe that there are scientific evidence out there from CSIRO on safety of bunkers and the use of bunkers and how to set them up. So it really sort of comes down to soil type and the depth of bunkers and things like that as well. and how you're going to keep your air clean in them. So those kind of things. So there's a lot of research out there already into bunkers. So if you're interested in bunkers, you can have a look at that.
Sorry, Jason, I might just invite you to stop your screen share so that we can actually see just you.
Yeah,
Is that
sorry.
okay?
Yep.
There you go.
Yep.
Thanks.
That's
Excellent. Thank
no
you.
worries. That's okay. Yeah, just got caught up in it, I suppose.
That's okay. Can you see the chat okay still?
Yes. Yep. Fire danger ratings are important that people be aware what is every day during the bushfire danger period. How can they find out the fire danger rating for their area? So the RFS website has it. Majority of the BOM has it when they put out their weather reports for the next day. Yeah, you really need to ensure that you know what the fire danger ratings are. They are changing at the moment. They've done some research into, at the moment, I think it's six things that they're going down to 4. So they're going to go down to 4 different danger ratings, which will make it hopefully a lot easier for the public to understand what's there. But yeah, through the Rural Fire Service website, and the BOM also has it. Minimum length of fire hose. So generally fire hoses come in 30-metre lengths. So as long as you can get around your entire property from wherever your pump is. So whether it's you've got a 10-metre pump, 10-metre diameter around your property, make sure that you can get all the way around your property. If you need to double back, that's fine. So if you've got to go halfway, so a 30 length, like if it's 60 metres all the way around, 130 length might be enough. So you go on the right-hand side and then you have to double back around the left-hand side. That can be fine. One of the other things that I should mention is having a bucket with a mop. So if you are under ember attack and you're protecting your property, having a bucket there with some mops, and all you're doing is, as a ember lands on your house, you're hitting it with the wet mop, and that extinguishes the ember, which is very handy. There are commercial setups for fire trailers. There's some really good ones that are around the Queanbeyan and Palerang district. Specifications, just making sure that it has a certain water supply, a decent pump, and a decent size hose. The reason why I say canvas hoses over PVC hoses is, once a canvas hose, especially the ones that that sort of percolate a bit, they become wet, so they're not going to burn as easy. If they get a small hole in it, it's not going to take a lot of the pressure out of the actual end of the hose of where you need it. With a PVC hose, if you drag it across hot ground and it gets a hole in it, the hose is useless. So the reason why I say a canvas hose is because they actually handle hot ground a lot better than all the others, because they actually allow the water to percolate. So the hose is wet a lot of the time already. I'm making it sound like the RFS will come to your property. No. So there is no guarantee that you will get a fire truck in an emergency. For example, the Queanbeyan Palerang area, we have 60 fire trucks. So, and that's across the entire district, from Queanbeyan all the way through to Braidwood, up to Nerriga, down to Araloon and Kawari. So, for example, we have Queanbeyan City Brigade, which has 3 trucks, Ridgeway, which has 2, Carwoola, which has 3, Captain's Flat, that has 3. They were the main ones that went to Taliesin. We lost 11 houses in that Taliesin fire in 2017, and we only had like 10 trucks. And you got, so no, a fire truck is not guaranteed to get anywhere. So a lot of our stuff, especially like tonight, is to try to encourage landowners to best prepare their property. We were likely to get, if you request somebody to come out and have a look at your property to help you and get advice to how best to set certain things up, we can do that, but that's more so in a the non-bushfire danger period area time. How much water do you need access to fight a fire? Good question, Rachel. How long's a piece of string? Depending, a lot of our firefighting appliances, so we have a Cat 1, which carries 3.5 to 4,000 litres of water. A Cat 7 can be anywhere between 1,600 litres of water to 2,500 litres of water, down to our small sort of ute size ones, which carry around the 600 litres of water. A lot of the trailers that you can buy commercially have a 1,000 litre pod on them. So it really depends on how much water, how much fire's around. For a house at the moment, a lot of the development applications for the new houses have to say that you have to have a 20,000 litres worth for firefighting. But saying that, you could easily go through that in half an hour, depending on how many hoses you have there and how much fire's around. So the more the better. I would be looking at probably around that sort of 10 to 20,000 litres, just sitting aside for firefighting purposes only. Sue, is it worth replacing hardwood timber decking with something for MGO board or fibre cement? It's a personal choice. Depending on how you have your decking set up and making sure that if there is a cavity underneath, to keep that clear. So a lot of people that have verandas and the like store their firewood under it to keep it dry. Well, that's then a fuel source. If you keep it all clear and mulched, one of the things I was talking with Alex yesterday was removing bark mulch from around your house and using gravel mulch is much better, because you want to keep anything that's likely to be a source for an ember to get into and ignite. It's best to try to get rid of, especially around the sort of anything from the eaves of your house and in. Definitely try to get rid of any sort of vegetation or anything that can carry fire in that regard. But it's depending on how you have your house set up, Sue. So my recommendation for that would be to ask your local fire control centre for your local brigade, if you don't know who they are, to have somebody come out and have a look. Yes, the old-fashioned string mops are what I meant, Verity, rather than a sponge mop to knock out the embers. Community fire units, good idea. Where yes, they are. Depending on where you are, Queanbeyan has a couple of community fire units. They're really good to set up. So if you are in a rural fire district and you would like one set up, make sure that you contact your local fire brigade, because they are a good idea, especially for those individuals that don't have the time to put in to the entire rural fire service. So you've only got limited time and availability and not wanting to go, or just join up as a member and understand you get the training and that kind of thing that you need to through the RFS there. Okay, thank you, Alex. So yes, Local Land Services is organising a cultural burning workshop.
And I will post another. I just don't want to. I want to wait until you finish so that people aren't looking at it.
Yep. Is having a garden bed around the house perimeter a fire risk? depending on how much you water it, if it's constantly kept green and watered, it's not going to be a massive fire risk. If you don't water it and then you have a lot of mulch, especially eucalyptus wood mulch and things like that, where an ember can get in and catch. There are examples, didn't have any photos to show, sorry, but there are examples where just having a wood frame around the window where an ember gets into the wood frame and smolders away, which then creates a gap to get into the house. So once an ember's inside the house, that's when the main issue is, because that's when the house will burn internally. So it's the best way to do it is to stop any sort of ember or any sort of location where a fire can actually get into the house. So depending on your garden and what you have in your garden, so really depends on what you have. There is bushfire preferred garden vegetation species that Alex has, and I believe and you can get from the Rural Fire Service. So I'm pretty sure she'll put that up in the link with all the other stuff. Any other questions? I don't think I've missed any.
No, so I've just put the yes. Yeah, my understanding is that the Yass Local Land Services is organising an event on cultural burning. It's had to be delayed a few times, but I know that they do have something in the pipeline, and I've just posted a link there for a summary that we've done as well on that. I can just post a few more links now, Jason. You did touch on one of the questions I had for you, which was cooperating with your neighbours. And someone asked, what should you sort of answered this when you were talking about your family and what you're doing with your children when they go down and visit your elderly parents. But say, for example, someone's working in Canberra and they can't get home. So have you got any top tips about what they might put in their plan?
Yeah, so the best thing to do is to make sure that you plan, you have two plans, one where you can stay and defend and one if you're away and need to leave. So the best part of that plan is to having your property prepared, especially if you can't get there. Because part of that plan is don't expect to get back home. So if you're out for the day and a fire starts, there is a very little chance that you will actually make it back to enact any plan if your plan was only to stay and defend. So you really need to be able to prepare your house to survive with the best possibility of survival if you're not there. So that's where there's certain things that you can do. Ian put up there, is it good to talk together and share your plans and ideas with your neighbours in the same street? Yes, it is. If you can pull together a bigger plan for your street, you can actually have a better result, and you can actually pool resources as well. So you can end up doing working bees on each other's house, which can help, especially if certain residents within that street have mobility issues or something like that, where they're not physically able to do a lot of the heavy work to prepare their property. You guys can help each other out, and we are one big community. So yes, that's a really good idea, Ian.
Can you see the question there from Ben about considerations with solar panels?
Yep. They can trap embers, but that's where they've been installed is, or I should say how they've been installed to create the minimum risk of embers getting in. So where they're bolted into a steel roof, making sure that there's no hole where an ember can get in. By the fact of just having them sitting there, if they're on a steel roof or a tiled roof with no holes, that's less likely to cause an issue. It's more of an issue if they've been installed incorrectly, or a storm's come up and damaged part of the roof where they are installed, where an ember can get into the actual roof cavity and start a fire that way. And there are fire guards that you can put around them, like the sort of like leaf gutters stuff, where you can get stuff to put around to stop embers from getting in, right in and under, which you can get from rural shops and hardware shops and that kind of thing.
There's a question there about New South Wales rural fire farm fire units process.
The only information that I have regarding that is that there's a process so we can communicate better with fire units, and that's using UHF radios. Other than that, I haven't seen much come out of that. It's still a work in progress, sorry. But yeah, it's more about what I have seen is how we can communicate better with farm fire units. So those that do have say a tanker trailer or something like that, that are working on their own property or their neighbour's property, and how we can work in together with them and communicate better. Because one of the findings has come out that, or preliminary findings, I should say, that's come out of the 2019-2020 was how can we communicate better with those fire farm units and work together as a collaboratively. Yeah, so if there's risk of fire, your fire panels should be your solar panels should be switched off. But please keep note that even though that they're switched off, they will still be live, because they can, while ever there's sun, they will continue generating power. So there can be an issue there. But yes, I would, if a fire started and it's going to likely encroach on your property, I would be turning them off, because they are much harder to isolate. Yes, Ian, the RFS does have a guide to preparing bushfire survival plans. You can find it on our website, or you can contact your local fire control centre and get a hard copy from them. But there is a digital version on our website, and I believe there's an app coming as well for that. Yeah, so the mosquito units that Birani is talking about are the farm fire units. So they're nicknamed mosquito units because they buzz around all over the place here and there on their property and their neighbours' properties. And that's where we're looking at UHF. And yes, all RFS units are currently being, if they don't have an UHF on board, they're being supplied one now. Because that's what, as I said, one of the preliminary findings that came out is the communication to make sure that we've got UHF on board. So that's not just to talk to our farm fire units, it's also to talk to our heavy plant, because a lot of the heavy plant only have UHFs. Advice for protecting farm buildings or feed sheds and stables, very similar to protecting your house, trying to ensure that you have a workable asset protection zone. But just be aware that the 1050 rule does not apply to those. So you'll need, if you have native vegetation within that you want to create a asset protection zone for those kind of buildings, you'll need to get a hazard reduction certificate for that. Just in regards to the 1050 rule, it's only a inhabitable dwelling, or if it's got a garage that's within 6 metres of the dwelling. And there's more further information that you can get on the Rural Fire Service website. And Alex has just put up the link for the fire retardant plants for your gardens for Canberra area, which that species list is really good. So those that still want to have a garden, they're the sort of plants that you can get for around here. CFA down in Victoria also have a really good brochure and fact sheets on that kind of stuff. And I'll pass the links on to Alex to put in
Thanks, Jason.
later.
There's just two things that spring to mind for me that we discussed yesterday. And one was you were talking about a special label that can go on people's gates.
Yes.
For water
Yep.
sources. Yeah.
Yep. So static water supply. So if you have a dam or a firefighting tank that you are willing to allow the Rural Fire Service to access in times of emergencies, we have a static water supply sign. So it's a metal sign that is a white sign with blue writing that has SWS written on it. And you just pop that on your front gate. So the Rural Fire Service in times of emergency know where they can get water, because especially in emergencies, we can get crews in from out of area that don't know the area. So for example, we've had crews from Sydney and far north coast that came down to help us out with our summer and our fire season 2019, 2020. They're not going to know the area like the locals do. So having that static water supply sign on your front gate means that they'll then be able to go and replenish with water when they need it if they're not sure. So just contact your local fire control centre or your local brigade, and they'll certainly be able to help you there. And
you were talking yesterday, you're saying for new houses, there's a requirement for 20,000 litres for new houses being built. So is that what you'd like? Is it the more the better, like for a dedicated firefighting water?
Yeah, so the more the better would be. But saying that, you also got to be able to live. So depending, as everyone knows, Australia's getting hotter and drier. Rainfall is, especially in times of drought, making sure that you're not putting everything into firefighting either. So you need to have that balance of what's going to be consumed for a personal use and what you can put aside for firefighting use. That's why they sort of recommend around the 20,000 litres mark. But anywhere up to, if you can, 100,000 litres would be perfect. A swimming pool does suffice as a SWS. So just to be clear that in an emergency, the Rural Fire Service can take water from anywhere. So that could be a swimming pool, a dam, a tank on the side of a house. Generally, we will replace it. We have especially if it's potable water, so you're using it for drinking water, we will replace it at the end of the emergency with similar water that we've taken. Yes, on your tanks, we prefer 65 mil Storts fitting. As you would have seen earlier, I was saying for firefighting purposes for hoses, it's 38 mil, but for your tanks, 65 mil is preferred and as low in the tank as possible without being too low. So it is 100 mil off the bottom. So that way we can hook up our bigger hoses so we can actually siphon out of the tank a lot quicker. Is it true that it burnt? So in regards to burn areas and hazard reductions, vegetation needs to recover. If we burn too often, we can destroy and actually eradicate certain species in an area. So that's where a hazard reduction certificate comes in as part of the environmental approval. So the area can be burnt either with a wildfire or a hazard reduction, and then there's certain timeframes that we need to allow that vegetation to recover. So it's not so much an embargo, it's about allowing the vegetation to recover, so we're not actually creating any sort of species die out in that particular area. If a gate is locked, does the RFS have a mandate to cut locks to access static water? We can cut locks if we believe that the fire's in there, we won't cut a lock just to go get water. We'll try to find water from somewhere else normally. If we do cut a lock, we will make sure that we cut the chain and not the actual lock itself, so that you can actually then relock it yourself without having to get another lock. Yes, the SWS can include a farm dam. Essentially, it's any large water supply that you're willing to allow the Rural Fire Service to take the water from. So dam, tank, or swimming pool.
Okay.
Yes, and they need to be readily accessible for a truck. So if it's a dam that has only access where you're going to get the truck bogged, we're not likely to get there. If the pool's not accessible for the truck to get close enough to use suction hoses to get water out of, we're not likely to use it either. So make sure that if you are willing to do that, make sure that it's accessible, but we will have somebody that will come out and inspect and say yes or no anyways.
Well, great. I think you've done exceptionally well. Thank you very much, Jason. It's been really good. So I'm just going to share my screen just for a few moments and just run through a few things, and then we'll come back to wrap it up. Is that okay?
Yep, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you.